Hello, I'm Matt, and I'd like to welcome you to the channel. The purpose of this channel is to hopefully inspire you, if you're substantially overweight, to find a healthy way, and not necessarily the deciding for life way that works for me, but a healthy way for you to lose weight and get down to a healthy weight and feel as awesome as I do. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about my book, Deciding for Life, How I Lost 70 Pounds Without Working Out and While Still Eating Foods That I Love, and focusing on Chapter 7, The Placebo Effect. Use the mind's amazing power to find success. But before we get started, I'm going to throw this backpack on with 70 pounds of lead in it and go for a 1-mile walk while we have a conversation about the placebo effect. So let's get going here. Okay, the strap's better. Okay, here we go. But before we get started, as each week I have to give this quick disclaimer. I am not a medical professional, so I provide no medical advice. My goal with my book and this YouTube channel is to inspire you, if you are substantially overweight, to find a healthy way, and like I just said, not necessarily the deciding for life way, because there are many ways to find for a person to get down to a healthy weight. I had somebody comment the other day on one of my videos that they've been able to do so by eating fruits and vegetables. That system wouldn't necessarily work for me. However, it works for them. But just like with anything else, my deciding for life system that works for me may have some features that may not work for you, or that may not be healthy for you. So if you see anything in my book or in my YouTube channel that you're interested in trying, ensure you speak with your doctor first to make sure that it's healthy for you to try whatever it is that you want to try. Because something that is necessarily healthy for me may not be healthy for you and could be detrimental to you. So now on to Chapter 7, the placebo effect. First time I recall hearing about the placebo effect, I was in either junior high or maybe high school, and I had a really down-to-earth science teacher. I really wish I could remember his name, because he really had a lot of things that he talked about that made a lot of sense, but I don't happen to remember his name. But he explained the placebo effect, and basically what it is where a person is given a sugar pill in place of an actual medication, and the effect that they feel, even though they're given a sugar pill, their mind so strongly believes that it works that they see improvements, and so do the scientists that do that. And that was the first time I ever heard about it. And when he talked about it, he said that in some studies, people had been, the placebo effect had been so effective in some of the studies that some people, up to 50% of people, would have positive responses to the sugar pill. So that was the first time that I heard about it. And for this book, I've done a lot of things that, there's not a lot of great scientific proof that they actually work. And one of the things that I do is I created what I call my Matt's mix, which is a mix of spices. And some of the spices are supposed to help you not be so hungry. And some of the spices are supposed to have some health benefits. Well, in my way of thinking, even if they're not scientifically proven to have these effects, if I believe it, or if I think they might, then I have probably at least a 50% chance of, getting a positive effect out of it. So I don't see any harm in using things that are, like I say in this case, spices, to help me in my journey to control initially to lose the weight, and now to control the weight. So if my mind thinks that, the spices help me lose weight, I've got a 50% chance that it would work for me. Another area that people, that's in the chapters of my book that I talk about is the apple cider vinegar. And It's not something that I currently drink at this point because I'm just maintaining. But at the time, after reading the book, Glucose Revolution, I decided to give it a try. And it, in my mind at least, it seemed to work. So even if it didn't, I still lost the weight that I was looking to lose. Some of the other features in the book Glucose Revolution that I added to my system was the way that I eat my food. Typically, I'll eat my vegetable first, my protein or meat second, and then my carbohydrate third. And that's because that's the way she, in the book Glucose Revolution, described reducing a person's sugar spike, which helps them keep from getting hungry quite so quickly. And I figure, she has some studies that show that works. But irregardless of what the studies say, if my mind believes it works, then it may really truly work for me. So that was another thing that we added to to my deciding for life system. My deciding for life system is based similarly to the body for life system in the sizes of the portions that you eat. But with Body for Life, I don't recall there ever being any mention of which order that you actually eat your food in. But if in my mind, eating my food in a specific order allows me to lose weight and then maintain my weight loss, then what does it hurt? For my book, Deciding for Life, I did a little bit more research on it recently. And before I wrote the book, that adds a little bit more credence to the thought processes of, using the placebo effect to have a positive effect on losing weight. And I found an article that was written by the Cleveland Clinic, and there was a Dr. Allen that was talking about, or that was being interviewed. And I'll have that down in the bottom of the description of the video. But he reiterated that, in some instances, even today, and this is about 30 plus years after the first time that I heard about the placebo effect, that the numbers are about the same. In his article, he talked about, or in the interview of him, they talked about, up to 50% of people can, find some benefit in a placebo that's just a sugar pill and have positive effects on whatever ailment that they're trying to treat. So if the mind is truly that strong and powerful, why not add it to some of the other things that we do in life in order to find more success? And that's kind of what my thought process with using some of these different techniques. Yeah, they may not be proven techniques, they may not be scientifically proven techniques, but if it works for me, I really don't care if it truly worked or if I just thought it worked and I lost the weight that I wanted to lose. And that's really kind of the whole point about, using the placebo effect to, to find the positive outcomes that I want to find. And Dr. Allen, one of the other things that he talked about in that article from the Cleveland Clinic was, the power of positive thinking. If a person truly believes in their mind that something's going to work, it has that much more of a chance of working. And he kind of gave the example that, in the pharmaceutical industry, if you can, figure that at least half of people, or close to half of people are going to find a positive effect from your medication, even if it's a placebo, then you really don't have to make a medication that is truly that effective to at least get more than 50% of people to show a positive result. And that's kind of interesting when you think about it. If big industries use the idea of positive thoughts, to sell their wares, why not use those ideas of positive thoughts and the placebo effect to find a positive way, to affect your weight? Another person that really talks a lot about being positive, and if you've watched any of my videos, you may have heard me talk about him before, is Myron Golden on YouTube. And Myron teaches business principles from a biblical perspective. And I'd never really heard anybody do that before. And it really got my attention because growing up, and I even worked at churches for about 14 years doing security when I was a police officer on Sundays and Wednesdays. I'd never really heard that much positive, ideas about, Christianity. And he teaches the business from a biblical perspective and shows the biblical references of, having a business. But he also talks a lot about the effects of the positive thought process. One of the things he talks about is, one of the worst things that you can have in your head if you're thinking about doing something is, what if this doesn't work? He says that one of the better things to have in your mind is the idea of how awesome is this going to be when it works? Because if you're thinking positive like that, your outcome is just that much more likely to occur than if you keep having doubt. Because, as humans, we have a tendency, to fulfill our own, prophecies in our head. So if we truly sit there and think, well, what if this doesn't work? Or we think negatively about whatever we're going to do. We think negatively about losing weight, and the probability, because our mind wants to fulfill its own prophecies in its head, you have a lot less of a chance of being successful when you have those negative thoughts in your head. And he really talks about that. And another example that he gave, because some people think, well, and I grew up kind of this way, you have to be realistic in the things that you think about. And, one of the examples he talks about, about positive thought and about being positive about things that don't seem possible is just, a jet airplane. You think about how big and heavy a jet airplane is. Yet, about 130 years ago, no plane had flown at all, let alone a big jumbo jet like we have flying through the skies today. And he uses that example because, most people would think it is not reasonable or, practical to think that, that big old airplane can get up in the air. But had somebody not thought about it and been positive about their thinking, and believed that it would happen, we wouldn't have jet airplanes flying around in the air. If the Wright brothers didn't truly believe that they could fly in the air, we wouldn't have airplanes today. Or we may have if somebody else would have come up and been positive about it. But the reality is unless somebody truly believed that, that an airplane could fly, we wouldn't have airplanes. Because it takes that belief in order to get that airplane off of the ground in the first place, because it has to be imagined in somebody's head. And if you go at life with the attitude that, nothing is possible unless you can see it, that you have to see it before you can believe it, you're rarely ever going to have a positive outcome. Because who would think that it's reasonable that a big old jumbo jet with how much they weigh could fly through the air? We see a lot of things in life that we don't even understand, but we just accept that they're true. Now you think about your microwave. You can't see how it cooks. You can't feel how it cooks, or at least you shouldn't, because I don't think you'd want your hand in there getting burnt. But we know it works. But somebody had to think about that and believe that it would work in order for it to, become a thing today, and for us millions and billions of people to use microwaves to heat our food. But if somebody hadn't believed that you could use microwaves to cook with, you wouldn't have microwaves. And who in their reasonable mind prior to microwaves would think that that was even possible? That's part of the power of belief that he talks about. And he takes it up from the biblical perspective. And I'm going to quote my notes here because my memory on verse and chapter is not that great. But the biblical reference that he talks about is Mark 9:23. All things are possible to him that believeth. And he used this example when he was talking about the jet airplane. if you truly believe it, you have to believe it before you can do it. It doesn't work the other way around. You have to have the belief before you can do. And that's a lot of what he talks about, the strength of belief. And if you really do want to pick up, if you're into business, he's got this very wonderful business-related channel, under Myron Golden. And, I've never really heard the positive aspects of owning a business until I watched his YouTube videos. And it's really encouraged me to push forward with creating a business. On the other hand, if you're just looking for biblical content from a very positive perspective, which I really had never seen before, he has his Myron Golden Bible study channel, both of which I think are very useful when it comes to having positive thought processes, which also is part of what I'm talking about here with the placebo effect, because if you have those positive thoughts in your head, you can do just amazing things, and without them, how would that airplane have ever flown? You got to be able to believe something is possible before it can become possible. The whole thing about the placebo effect is the mind is a very, very powerful thing. And the more we learn how to use it, to our advantage instead of our disadvantage. And no, it's not easy to get all those negative thoughts out of your head. But the more you focus on those positive thoughts, the more likely you are to be successful in what you're trying to do, whether it be losing weight, starting a business, or whatever else your endeavors are. It's so important to think positively, to achieve your goals. It's part of what, it comes back to that deciding, and the title of my book is Deciding for Life. You have to make that decision. In order to make a decision, you have to have some belief, because it would be really hard to decide, okay, I'm going to go do this, but I don't believe in it. Are you truly going to go do something that you don't truly believe in? I really think that that's probably not going to happen. The placebo effect, when you think about how much it can, if you use it to your advantage, if you truly believe something can work, it may not even truly work, but you know what? I figure if it gives me a 50% chance of it working, what's it hurt as long as it's not something that's going to hurt me? And adding some spices or, changing the way that, or the order in which I eat food, and, adding some apple cider vinegar, all of those little things, they may not actually do anything. They may be proven scientifically at some day that they don't truly work. But if it works for me, what do I care about the science of it? And that's what I mean about, a person has to find a system that works for them. That's why I talk about my Deciding for Life system not being the end-all be-all of losing weight. It's a system that works for me with my personality. I'm not the personality, I don't have the type of personality that I can eat well or eat good every day. I just don't. I like sweets too much. I'm truly addicted. It's one of the things that I left out of last week's chapter about the foods that I eat during the week. People don't talk about sugar that much, so I'm going to cover it real quick. But in my mind, I think people are just as addicted to sugar as some people are addicted to methamphetamine or fentanyl that we have killing so many people today. When I was before I retired, the last 4 or 5 years that I worked at the sheriff's office, we were having more I'd go to more deaths related to fentanyl than anything else, or fentanyl and heroin. But I think a lot of it was just straight up fentanyl. But that was more than the car crash deaths. That was more than the suicide deaths. In fact, now granted, a lot of your natural deaths don't. As a supervisor, I wouldn't have to go to unless there was something, unusual about it. But the overdose deaths were more than anything. And when you look at how sugar affects a person, you eat some sugar, and according to the Glucose Revolution book, you get a sugar spike, or get a glucose spike after you eat the sugary item. Well then, after it burns off out of your bloodstream, you get a crash. And what does that crash make you want to do? It makes you want to go get more sugar. And I can truly attest to that, because on my cheat days, I eat a bit of sugar. And we'll talk about that. And if you were to see what I typically eat on a cheat day, you'd wonder how anybody could eat what I eat on a cheat day and still lose weight. But I eat an enormous amount of sugar on my cheat day. And I can tell you, once I start eating sugar in the morning, I get hungry much quicker. I crave that sugar that much more. And because it's my cheat day and I know the way that my system, deciding for life, works, I can eat that sugar on my cheat day. I just have to limit it to my cheat day, and I have to use some common sense. When I very first started with this system, I could pretty much eat anything I wanted on my cheat day. But after I got my weight down to where I want it, I have to be a little bit more cognizant of my cheat day, because if I do go overboard on my cheat day, I can gain weight. Or I can gain weight. I always gain weight on a cheat day. But what I'm saying is the average for the week, because my weigh day is on Monday, will be higher if I eat too much today than when I very first started and went through my deciding for life system. So you do have to use some care. But when you think about, when I was in the police academy, they talked about, how addiction works. With an addiction to a drug, you typically get a high, or kind of like a sugar high. I'm guessing it's a lot more intense. I don't know. I don't use any recreational drugs, illegal drugs. Mostly I just use some ibuprofen if I get a headache or a body ache. So that works for me. Now keep in mind, if you have medical issues that you need to take medicines, that's just part of life for some people. And that's a good part of life, because for a lot of people that keeps them alive a lot longer. But my health right now, I don't need anything other than some ibuprofen every once in a while. For a headache here or there, or if I overdo it out, working in the shop or something like that. But back to the addiction part. You look at you get the high, you get the crash, then you want to go get more of that drug or, sugar. So, and then over time, it seems to take more of that drug, at least that's what they taught when I went to the police academy, in order to get that same high that you got. And I think it's kind of similar with sugar, because, even myself, and once I start eating sugar on my cheat day, I really want it. I crave it. So I'm still addicted to sugar. I'm just able to limit it to 1 day a week, and that's been working for me. I truly believe if a person can, eat healthy all the time, I truly believe that's probably better for you. But I know with my personality, that's just not going to work, as I'd give up and go back to being the fat man I used to be. And a lot of people would look at me now and think I'm too thin. And, some people, and a lot of that goes down to your perspectives. But when you're heavier, it's normal to look at other people that weigh less than you and think they're too skinny. Just like me, I'm kind of skinnier now, and when I look at heavy people, I really feel for them. And that's partially because I know how much more I can do now that I'm 70 pounds lighter. You might look at, I was 235, 240 pounds when I started this process this time. And I've been over 265 pounds in my life. So I've been on the heavier side. I've also been the skinny kid in high school that couldn't gain weight. I graduated from high school at 117 pounds, and I was 5'10.5". So, I'd eat whatever I wanted, and it just wouldn't put the weight on. I didn't really know what I should be eating. I was eating a lot of junk that didn't help with building muscle, but I didn't know better. It's a little warm out here today. And we got about 6 more minutes to go to get back to the workshop so I can put this lead down. But when you think about how sugar affects people, I look at other people that I know, and they just can't give up sugar. They can't even give it up, 6 days a week. They have to eat it pretty much every day. And when you look at all the heart conditions and all the things that, since sugar has become so plentiful today, that wasn't plentiful 150 years ago, it kind of makes you wonder. I'm not a medical professional, but it makes me wonder as a layman, how much negative effect all that sugar is having on people. And, a lot of people, they think sugar, they think it's just the sweet stuff. But those carbohydrates, all the carbohydrates break down into simple sugars before your body uses them. So, if you go and eat a piece of bread, it's one of the things she talked about in her book, The Glucose Revolution, is if you put a piece of white bread in your mouth and chew on it for a minute, after a minute, it tastes really sweet, just like sugar. And it's one of her examples of how, different carbohydrates, break down. Normally you don't notice that because by the time it gets broken down to that level, it's already in your stomach. So you don't necessarily know that, realize that. But she used it as an example, and it makes a lot of sense when you look at what carbs do to you. I mean, if I eat more carbs than I would normally eat, I have a tendency to get more hungry more quickly. So I can really see what she's talking about, with her Glucose Revolution book. You look at, she was using an instant glucose monitor so that she could see, what would spike and what wouldn't spike her blood sugar, when she'd eat something. And she did some other things like, she advocates doing a 10-minute walk after you eat, and that's supposed to reduce your sugar spike, which I haven't tried that. But, it's one of the other things she talks about, and, maybe that would be something that would work well for you. But when I look at, all the things and how powerful the mind is, you really have to decide for your life that you want to live a happier and healthier and lighter lifestyle, and you have to believe that it's possible, because if you don't truly believe it's possible, the probability is, your mind is going to, end up giving you that, self-fulfilled prophecy and not giving you what you truly want. You have to get to the point that you believe it. And if you believe it, even if it's something that doesn't necessarily work, it may end up working out for you. And if it's not something that negatively affects your health, then what's that hurt? If the big industries are using the placebo effect, to sell their pharmaceuticals, then why don't we as human beings use that positive thinking of the placebo effect in order to better our own lives? And I really think that that's, key to a lot of what I've been able to do with my Deciding for Life system. Is I've lost weight before using this similar system. I was doing a lot more walking. I'm not the type of person that really enjoys, going for walks or working out. It's hard to fit it into the things that I want to do during the day. And, for me, I did work out for about 15 weeks after I initially finished the 1 year with the Deciding for Life. And I just got busy enough, and trying to fit it in just didn't work out great for me. But I do know that I can go back to my system, and excuse me, the horsefly is back to harassing me. But if I go back to my system, and adjust my diet, then I can get my weight back to where I want it. I was up a little bit. I'm starting to come back down. It really didn't take much of changing how much I ate before, before my weight leveled off. And that's one of the things with the Garmin app that really highlights to me is when you look at, how many calories you burn doing anything all day versus just the calories you burn from, existing. It's just really mind-blowing to me. Just existing, I burn about 2,000 calories a day. 1,900 to 2,000 if I'm working on a computer. But this walk that I'm doing, I'm going for a 1 mile walk with 70 pounds of lead on my back, and it only burns about 236 calories. And this is a bit of effort, and maybe today it'll be a little different because it's kind of hot out here, but it really emphasizes how important controlling what you eat is. Okay, we're back at the shop, so I'm going to get this backpack off and give a quick closing and get y'all out of here. Oh, I love it every time I take that backpack off, because it truly does remind me of how awesome it feels to be 70 pounds lighter. Let's get a little better scenery than my old building. Okay. Now I just walked 1 mile with a backpack with 70 pounds of lead in it. And it's not about me. It's about trying to inspire you to find a healthy way, not necessarily the deciding for life way, to get yourself to a healthy weight so that you can feel as awesome as I feel. Because it does feel awesome when you lose 70 pounds. I can do so many more things that I couldn't do before, or at least I couldn't do as well before, or couldn't do as long before. It's just so amazing how much better you feel when you're not quite so heavy. If you found this content interesting, please like, subscribe, and click the notification bell. If you know somebody that this content, can help, please share it with them. I did write a book. It's called Deciding for Life: How I Lost 70 Pounds Without Working Out and While Still Eating Foods That I Love. YouTube isn't paying me for this video. I'm not a monetized channel. I don't have enough subscribers to get monetized. So all of this work and all the work with the book, other than the few people that have bought it, has all been on me. But I'm not doing this about me. I want to do it so that you, if you're substantially overweight, can feel as awesome as I do. I'll have a link in the description below for the book. It's on Amazon KDP. The e-version is $9.97, and the paperback, it's only about 78 or 79 pages, is $19.97. If you want to help the channel out and can afford it, you can buy the book. If not, that's fine. I'm still going to bring this content as long as I can so that hopefully I can inspire you to live a happier and healthier and, yes, lighter lifestyle. Thanks for watching, and may you have an awesome and happier and healthier and, yes, lighter day.